I tried one of these at Guitar Center once, and it was so bad. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. The time has come. That's right, we're finally going to document this model. I used to have an old philosophy that I did not want to touch a Gibson guitar until I could afford it. But this was the one I broke that rule for because it was just so cheap. It was like $300 at a Guitar Center. I picked it up and it was trash. And ever since that day, I hated this model. But today's the day we find out if that was just a hot piece of trash that wasn't taken care of, or if they're all that bad. So let's go ahead and see what we're working with here. Ooh, it's silver and it's got one pickup. But perhaps the most defining feature of this little series is the really strange Gibson headstock. I get so many messages of people asking me, is this legit? Do you guys see anything wrong here? It just has a bump. This model was so inexpensive they didn't bother to do the traditional open book headstock style shape. Instead, we just got this little bump with no divot in the center. This was part of the American series. Now, the American series name didn't really stick with these historically, but it is in there in old marketing material. Don't confuse it with the late 90s All-American series. This series consisted of the Challenger, Invader, and Corvus models. Here's the two base models, the Challenger and the Corvus. Now the Corvus is this weird freaky bird thing that was initially meant to be a headless design, but marketing decided, hey, we need to put a head on that. More information in this episode. And then our Challenger is this weird Les Paul-like shape that has this big top-routed pickguard on it that both of these models have in common. But they all came with the exact same electronics, and there were 3 levels. The 1, the 2, and the 3. The 1, which we're documenting here today, is a single humbucker version. This pickup has an Alnico 5 magnet in it and an interesting black cover. And then the pickguard just covers over the neck pickup route, which the 2 would have a neck pickup in that position. So if you happen to find a spare pickup somewhere, you could convert a 1 into a 2 because they were not marked any differently on the truss rod cover. You just have to add some more controls and a toggle switch. But then there was also a 3, which we would have to come over here to this Corvus that we had documented. We've got 3 single coil Gibson pickups. There were Challenger 3s, but they were not in the initial marketing material. That came later. But you'll also notice that these have an intonatable wrap tail piece design. We first saw those on the Spirit series of Gibsons. And of course, these are all bolt-on necks. But the third one within the series is known as the Invader. It's the highest end of the series, because that one's more like a continuation on the Paul series, except for it's made of different woods. You've got your zebra bobbin pickups. You're no longer a top-routed pickguard design. It's slightly stripped down from like a standard or a studio, but a little bit higher end than what we're documenting today. And they were introduced for the 1983 model year. So to simplify things, these are what came after the Gibson Sonics model. But this also took the place of the S1 and the Marauder. Those were pretty formally done by 1980, but you can still find some runoffs until about 1982-ish. So kind of think of this as a refreshing. They didn't want to be Stratocaster and Tele knockoffs anymore. They were essentially just knocking off themselves, but in a slightly more authentic way. And to be honest, Gibson has stayed pretty true to that method ever since this time period, with rare exceptions. And this is a running theme of the 80s for Gibson. They were just too late to the punch. What if they had perfected all of this back in the 70s? Maybe the history books would be completely different today had they had gotten all these budget level guitars off the ground to compete with all the cool lawsuit era type guitars. So if you wanted to put these into kind of today's modern standards, it's very similar to what Gibson did around 2017 with the M2 series, you know, Firebird Zero level guitars. They were trying to compete with all the cheap import models that were coming in, but they still wanted it to be USA made as their main selling moniker. That's why it's called the American series. So cheap, but still American made. This is also around the time the Epiphone started to come back. They made the Epiphone USA guitars that you can learn about in this Gibson Spirit episode. I've had plenty of Corvus models in the past, but this is the first Challenger that I've actually had time to sit down with and get to intimately know. This one doesn't feel as bad as my first one. It comes across as a little bit higher end than a Sonics, but I really like that we can see the maple neck on the back here, so that helps. And I'm noticing not only is our headstock shape different, it's also slightly angled, so you can see a little bit more of that natural wood, even from a straight-on perspective. In fact, I'm surprised they even bothered to put headstock wings on these things. Just make a Melody Maker-esque. But I'm also shocked that we have an ebony fretboard. That's nice. But perhaps the most fun thing is all the colors you can get on these. You've got the base model that's silver, but then you've got all these other awesome flavors. Antique Natural, Ebony, Orange Tangerine, which is my favorite. There's a red one, electric blue, and a very rare yellow metallic. Lots of them to collect if you wanted a 1, 2, and 3 variation on every single color. If you really like this color, but you want it on something slightly higher end, there was a special pre-Les Paul Studio called the Silver Streak, and before that there was the 1977 25th anniversary Les Paul customs that we documented in this episode. You can see one that was really clean, then one that was aged more. So to sum all that up, this was one of Gibson's budget model guitars. Is it the best thing in the world? Probably not. But there are some people out there that have nostalgic feelings over these, or you're a punk rock guy and you've modified it out to be a great guitar. There's definitely some redeeming qualities behind these, but when they were first introduced, they were pretty cheap. But to learn more about this particular one, let's go ahead and throw it on the workbench to take a look at its parts and specs. I'm trying my best to give this thing a fair chance. I give it a nice deep clean. We conditioned the fretboard, polished our frets up a little bit. It's looking a lot nicer now. But let's check out what we're working with under the hood. So unlike the Sonics that we reviewed a couple of days ago, this is not a swimming pool route. It is specifically routed for 2 pickups. Now it looks like you could accommodate humbuckers and single coils in here if you wanted to, but that means the Challenger 3, which I was able to confirm did not come out at launch, would have had to have had a complete swimming pool route. But our neck is super easy to tell that it's maple. Looks like it still has the maple block capping off the truss rod too. And then a bit of a mystery hole. And someone wrote DF in here. And maybe an HT? Might be factory worker sign-offs. But here's a good indicator of how much the silver finish has aged. Here's what it would have looked like new. Here's how it is now. It kind of gets a slightly greenish hue. Here's what the backside of our pickup looks like. Got the Tim Shaw style date codes on it, dating this one to February of 1983, but it's on a sticker instead of being ink stamped. And kind of like the L6S and a few other guitars in this era, you have 3 height adjustment springs, which means you can adjust the tilt of the pickup if you wish. But our pickup within the circuit reads about 9K ohms. But it utilizes CTS pots. This one dates to 1983, very late in the year, 45th week. And then the solder works too crazy on that one to read. That looks to me that somebody might have put a different pickup in here at one point in time. And then we just have a standard output jack. The Challenger 1 only has a master volume and a master tone. It's also important to note, just in case you're interested in buying this from me, this knob is internally cracked, but your tone knob is perfectly fine. The bridge is a really interesting setup. It's essentially a separate bridge and tailpiece in the style of a complete wraparound bridge. You've got these nice brass saddles on it. It's fully intonatable, but there's at least 2 different ways you can technically string these. Kind of similar to a normal bridge. So you can hook it up like this and top wrap it. You can see that's how this one was done most of its life because of all the string scratches down there. Or another option is you put the bridge the other way and then you string it through the backside, and then it looks a little bit more traditional. I believe the top wrapping is how it was intended to be used, but if you need to adjust the way the strings feel, that is one option you could have. This one has some nice aging to it. Lots of finish checking in a silver metallic finish like this. Pretty much all over the top of the guitar. This thing was heavily played, not necessarily babied. You can tell the bridge fell off at one point in time and really dinged up the top. And you've got some more finish checking along the edges here. We can also see lots of finish checking along the edge. Thankfully, no breaks, cracks, or repairs, but definitely lots of dings. I was kind of curious what they made the body out of on this, but unfortunately, it's not exposed anywhere, except for right here. Thankfully, a little bit of chipped finish happened. When I first saw it, I thought maybe maple or alder, but the more I look at it, the closer it looks to mahogany, so I'll let you guys help me draw a conclusion on that. But now our frets. This one definitely has an ebony fretboard. It seems most of them have rosewood, so it's just one of those things that varies. Same thing's true on Les Paul Studios in this era. I'm sure they just kind of used what was readily available. So I did deep clean this, but unfortunately I was unable to get our fingernail wear and string wear out of the fretboard, but you really only see that in really bright lighting situations like this. And we've just got our standard 22 frets. We've got that 24 3/4 inch scale length with a 1.7 inch nut width. That increases to 2.08 by the 12th. First fret neck depth 0.82 and then 0.97 by the 12th. That's kind of right where the heel starts though, so it's probably more accurate to take it like around here. It's a pretty slim feeling neck, definitely C, but it does chunk up towards the top area. Here's that neck profile at the 1st fret and the 12th fret. It stays fairly consistent, but you can kind of see that transition. So now our headstock. Yeah, it looks a little bit weird because of the shape, but it's also a little bit stouter down here. Early Les Paul Studios also look like this. The whole angledness of this headstock is so strange towards the top. But if you're curious what these lines are right here, are those cracked repairs? Nah, that's just the seam line of where the wings were glued to the headstock. Whenever they just do paint on the top, over time, those can become a little bit more apparent. You'll also notice that there's some chipping in the finish around each tuner. That's pretty common, just happens from the pressure that the washers are putting on the headstock. But our truss rod's looking good. And here's what our cover looks like. It says Challenger. But we've got some discoloration back here, a little bit right here from a stand, all that finish checking we were talking about earlier. Somebody's replaced our strap buttons, although our neck one looks era correct. Other condition things, you've got some gouges back here. And if you get it in the light, you've got so many buckle worming marks. Condition is similar to the front. But you'll notice we do not have any type of comfort carve on a Challenger. It is more of a traditional Les Paul special body shape without the carved top. I find it funny that a lot of people don't really care for these Challengers or talk about them too much, but the Sonics gets a lot more love. I think it's just because it's a more common model, but this neck pocket is way better than that Sonics we had just reviewed. And I don't see any actual neck pocket cracks, it's just the finish checks. But here we can see beautiful maple. It's gloss. We even have a little bit of flame figuring within here. The neck is quite nice on this guitar. So I've got some high hopes that this one will be much better than the last one that I had tried. But we've got our Gibson branded tuners, and it's always cool to see this. Usually that's the original store that sold it. They used to put their decal stickers on the back. I mean, can you imagine if there was a dealer out there that still did that today? That's just something from a bygone era. Here's my word of advice. If you happen to get one that's not particularly attractive, do not remove it because you'll still see a sticker shadow. You can kind of see what I'm talking about right here. You see how it's not as yellowed underneath there? This one was made on the 4th day of 1984. Production number 560 from the Nashville plant. Quick look under the blacklight. Everything's looking good here. I like the silver finish with the green on top of it. It kind of glows a little bit differently than other guitars, but you can see those chips we were talking about earlier. Moving up to our headstock, everything's looking the way I would expect to see. Although it looks like maybe a little bit of clear coat rub there. Now looking at the back, you can see those stand rash marks or whatever they were. They're yellow in regular lighting situations. Got a small finish chip right there. And the back of the neck is relatively clean. A little bit of clear coat wear right there, but nothing too crazy. So overall, not a bad example, if you don't mind some player's wear. So all said and done, it's about 98% original, just that bottom strap button. And the weight is actually considerably pleasant, 6 pounds, 13 ounces. So let's go ahead, plug it in, and see how this lone pickup sounds. Right, it's actually a really resonant guitar. You just feel the whole thing vibrating. That's kind of like the Gibson Sonics, how this is all mounted on a pick guard. It just makes the guitar sound a little bit different when you strum it acoustically. I wouldn't say this pickup is necessarily fantastic, but I think it sounds pretty good so far. Does distort when you really go into it heavy, but to be fair, this one is set almost next to the strings. Definitely doesn't have a lot of clarity to it. It's a bit darker sounding than most humbuckers. You don't really hear all the notes really ring out. Now that we know all about the Gibson Challenger 1, what are my final thoughts on this thing? Is it the worst Gibson guitar that they've ever made? No, I can finally put that story to rest. That just happened to be a particularly bad example that had a terrible setup and was probably in need of other repairs. Because you gotta remember, that was before I was really well versed in what makes a guitar good. It was very early within my guitar playing career that I tried one of these things. So I'm glad I finally gave it another shot. Where does it sit within the Gibson lineup? I would say it is better than a Sonix 180 Deluxe. However, one of the ones that has like Dirty Fingers pickups in it, yeah, I'd probably still go with one of those. The humbucker, I think that's the true reason why these things never really took off. It doesn't really do distortion all that well. It's not absolute trash, but I would want some more clarity out of that personally. But as far as the clean tones, I was actually happy with it. The extra mellowness worked pretty well in its favor. But it's really lightweight, you've got the mahogany body, it's all real wood, and you've got the ebony fretboard. It definitely does not hold a candle to a the Paul. I would still suggest one of those over these, but I do kind of feel these might be underrated on the vintage market. So now that our Challenger's done, I guess I need to try an Invader now that I'm not as scared of these things. All right, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're interested in being the next owner of this one, you can find it on my website, troglysguitarshow.com. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.